The world is divided into four spheres, each sphere divided among continents and nations. Nations are divided by borders and interests. These interests divide the news. We examine the impact of these divisions on people and power. This is Imaginary Lines. Welcome to the program. I'm your host, Chris Spanos. Coming up on the show, despite Evo Morales' recent electoral victory in Bolivia, Western media continue to discredit him and other leaders in Latin America. I'll speak with Guardian columnist Elie Hagen about this problem. But first, a look at media and Latin America. The growing tendency to consume news online will lead to the disappearance of television, warned French communications specialist Bernard Cassin. Cassin made his comments at the opening of the International Convention on Radio and TV, held in Havana, Cuba, October 19th to 24th. Cassin stressed that although he does not have recipes to create an ideal media, TV, without doubt, will end sooner or later. The Havana Convention, the first of its kind, aimed at gathering ideas that could help counter the Western media's manipulation of information, in particular with young generations. The event's program included focus on how high-demand media can shape values and defend the island nation. To this end, the conference sought to deepen an understanding of the massive influence of soap opera consumption. Almost 600 delegates from 27 countries participated in the Havana conference, including the pan-Arab channel Al Majidin and Telesur. Sunday, October 12th, Bolivian President Evo Morales experienced yet another electoral landslide. He won more than 60% of the vote. But despite his popularity, Western media continued to suggest that Evo is one among other anti-democratic leaders in the region. Elie Hagen is a columnist for The Guardian. She joins me to discuss media coverage of Morales. Hi, Elie, and welcome to Imaginary Lines.
Hi, thank you for having me.
What was media's reaction to Evo's victory?
Well, I suppose it depends what media you're talking about. I think that a lot of progressive media outlets across the world, on the more radical end, were really welcoming of Evo's victory. But of course, the mainstream media, particularly in the US and Western Europe and in Britain, were very skeptical about Evo's victory, which I think is a pattern that we've seen across Latin America with socialist leaders, that there is a skepticism that they can really run successful economies and enact policies that benefit the majority of people.
Western mainstream media suggested that anti-US sentiment was the reason for Evo's popularity. How do you explain Evo's popularity?
I just don't think that any people, Bolivian or otherwise, are that stupid. Would you vote for somebody because they said negative things about Hillary Clinton? Obviously not. You know, you vote for somebody because you see that your country is improving under their rule, or you vote against them because you see that your country is getting worse under their rule. And there's very concrete and tangible evidence that under Evo, Bolivia has improved immeasurably.
Now, in reaction to Evo's victory, the New York Times editorial board published their editorial basically calling Evo a caudillo. What is your reaction to the New York Times editorial?
It's just a total crock. I mean, and also the nerve of the New York Times to say such a thing when, in fact, you know, they talked about Evo's desire to stay in power for longer than he'd originally planned. Well, actually, one of the hugest problems that Bolivia has had, and one of the big reasons for its economic problems historically, has been instability of government. In fact, at one point during Bolivia's history, it had 3 changes of government in 14 months. And American foreign policy has had an enormous impact on that. And so for it now to be entering a period of stability, which has been upheld by democratic elections in Bolivia, and for the New York Times to pour scorn on that is really quite something. And especially because in the editorial, the New York Times example of positive democracy in Latin America was Colombia, particularly the presidency of Alvaro Uribe, who, which, by the way, the Financial Times called once the savior of Colombia, who presided over the biggest human rights violations in Colombia.
You mentioned that the New York Times editorial praised Alvaro Uribe, the former president of Colombia, and Colombia this period was a major player in the U.S. foreign policy of fighting the drug war in Latin America. How does Bolivia fit into U.S. drug war plans?
I think this has been one of Evo's most interesting actions, actually. I really welcome his intervention because he's performed the really important task of differentiating between the coca leaf, which is an important part of indigenous culture, and cocaine, which is an illegal drug and, you know, has a massive part in the drug war. And I think that what Morales has shown is that if you tackle the drug war with negotiation and with an understanding of the nuances of the coca leaf and respect for indigenous culture, you're much more likely to achieve success in the drug war than if you take a military stance. Coca production in Bolivia has been falling in the past few years under Morales. And I think if you compare that to a country like Mexico, for example, where today a drug cartel posted an image of a young journalist's body on her Twitter account after she exposed gang activity, I think that to me is evidence that the military approach to the drug war, which is one that the US favors, and to an extent the UK, is really damaging.
Now, Bolivia does have its own domestic problems, child labor, for example. How do you explain Morales' popularity in context of these problems?
Well, I think that it's important to note that Morales is not a perfect leader. Bolivia is not a perfect country, and it does have problems. And Morales has his own challenges that need addressing. But I think that it's also important to note that, first of all countries have problems. No leaders are perfect. And the state that Bolivia was in before Morales took power was, you know, as I mentioned before, an economic basket case, as the New York Times put it. So I think that when you come from a place of incredible poverty, it was one of the most impoverished countries in the region, it's inevitable that it's going to take a long time to fix those problems completely. What I do think about this is that now Morales has legalized child labor from the age of 10. It's imperative that he makes child labor a priority for his next term. I think that should be a central element of his progressive project in Bolivia. And I think that, you know, serious questions do need to be asked of him if he can't do that in the future. But I think for now, he deserves to be given the chance, and the children who requested this law deserve to be listened to, and they should be respected.
Thank you very much, Ellie, for joining me on Imaginary Lines.
Thank you very much for having me.
In his essay, Bushmeat, The Politics of Disgust, in the journal Cultural Anthropology, Mike McGovern writes that perhaps he shouldn't worry about Vice's portrayal of the Ebola virus, but he does. And that's because his students are more likely to get their news from Vice than the New York Times. Vice combines the reckless, post-adolescent vibe of Jackass with the epistemological calling card of anthropology. They're hipper and closer to the ground-level realities of places like Liberia than the square middle-aged men reading the establishment news, McGovern writes. They take the parody of Jon Stewart or Stephen Colbert and add some Hunter S. Thompson excitement to it. For example, in a video on Ebola in Liberia, Vice reporter Kaj Larson offered some smoked monkey to two strangers in Monrovia. They rip the carcass in half, while Larson asks, "Can we not splatter the monkey all over me, please? Oh my God, I'm getting fucking pegged with Ebola monkey right now. I'm getting fragged with Ebola monkey." Of the scene, McGovern writes that it displays the bravado of Civil War-era combatants who were always ready to one-up each other in the macabre competition to look scarier than the next guy once reporters came around. Vice's coverage produces a feeling of disgust, which downgrades the human dimension of those Liberians Vice portrays. McGovern observes that portraying Liberians as eating apes evokes the specter of cannibalism, like other Vice documentaries on Liberia. That's it for today's Imaginary Lines. Thanks for watching. I'm your host, Chris Spanos. Please join me next week.